Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Arsenal return to UEFA Champions League action on Thursday night. A trip to Bergamo awaits us where we will face Gianpiero Gasperini's Europa League holders. La Dea, which translates to the goddess, see their logo, have had, I think it's fair to say, an inconsistent start to the campaign. Can we go there and win? We're going to find out on Thursday night. Our Champions League campaign kicks off and we get a first taste of the new league format. How's it going to go? We'll get into all of that on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner pod. Hey everybody, how are you doing? Hope you're all good. Hope you're all well. Good to see you on this Wednesday afternoon. I had to think about that because it's just thrown me. This whole thing of playing a Champions League game on a Thursday has completely thrown me. I keep looking at it and I'm like, shouldn't we be playing tonight? Because if we're in the Champions League, we should have been playing on Tuesday or Wednesday. But no, we're playing on Thursday, which has weirded me out. I have to say, it's thrown my week into complete disarray. We'll get into that topic in a little bit. No, you know what? Actually, let's start with that. Let's address this Thursday thing, because I know it's just for this week. But the idea of playing a UEFA Champions League tie on a Thursday night, to me, guys, and correct me if you disagree or think I'm wrong, is just fundamentally wrong. I hate it. The fact that we have a trip to the Etihad on Sunday makes it worse, of course, and some will argue that it's given us extra time to recover from the North London derby, and some will even make the point that if you play Wednesday and Saturday, it's the same in terms of rest as if you play Thursday and Sunday. But I still don't like it. There's something awkward about it. There's something that just doesn't sit right with me. I want to touch on the new format very, very quickly. We haven't really discussed this, I don't think. We did do a reaction to the draw, of course, and, we broke that all down and we talked about our opposition and how, when the first couple of names came out into PSG, you thought, uh-oh. And as the draw went on, it appeared to be kinder to us. And now I'm actually quite confident that we're going to get through, and we're going to get through maybe with some room to spare as well. Call me arrogant or whatever. But just looking at this new format, I'm trying to figure out whether I like it or not, is where I'm at. I don't want to be that guy that says it's rubbish before I've given it a chance. I really do want to give it a chance. I think that's the right way to be. Because obviously this has been taken, a decision that's been taken for a couple of reasons. So the first reason is the obvious one, which is more games equals more money. And we know that the players aren't totally enamored with that idea. And we heard Rodri come out yesterday speaking ahead of Manchester City's clash with Inter about the fact that nobody asked the players, and it feels like we're heading towards a point where players might actually strike. So that's not good news for anybody. That's a warning sign, a warning shot, if you like, fired back at UEFA over this new format. And I don't think the problem is just with the Champions League format, by the way. Like, I know that that's what has kind of brought this discussion and this debate up again, because it's more games, more football, etc., etc. But if we're being completely honest, the issue is a much wider one. We're talking about an extended Club World Cup that I'd argue nobody really cares about. We're talking about a country, our country that we play in, having 2 domestic cup competitions when so many others don't. You've got the EFL Trophy, a competition that I've been following this season because I've been working on it. But I knew it existed before, of course, obviously, but I didn't realise, how wide spanning that competition is, and I can understand why I'm turning up to commentate on matches involving League One and League Two sides who are going, I just haven't got the resources to manage this, and so I'm going to make 11 changes to my side that played at the weekend. That's what you're dealing with. So this is not just an issue right at the very pinnacle of our sport when you're talking about Champions League, Europa League, all of that. This is something that filters much further down. And it's a problem, I think. It's a problem. If I look at last night's results, now I didn't watch any of the Champions League games last night. I did get to watch back the highlights, so I'm talking from a position of having only seen those. If I look back at the results, it's kind of as you expected. Juventus 3, PSV Eindhoven 1. Young Boys were beaten comprehensively at home by Aston Villa, even on the plastic pitch. I managed to catch some of that game because it was live early. AC Milan got off to a great start against Liverpool, but ultimately their quality told, and they ran out 3-1 winners, comfortable winners in the end. Bayern Munich putting 9 past Dinamo Zagreb. Real Madrid 3, Stuttgart 1, Sporting 2, Lille 0. And I know that the idea is to kind of try and get rid of as many dead rubbers as you can and try and make something or create a situation where there's something riding on absolutely every game. But there are still fixtures that when you look at last night's results are formalities. Like Bayern and Dinamo Zagreb could have been drawn in the same group and you could have got the same outcome. This has not taken that away completely. Real Madrid were always going to beat Stuttgart. Liverpool are a much better side than AC Milan nowadays. So, yeah, I mean, it's too early, I guess, to make judgments on whether the new format works. We're going to have to wait and see. I'm sure we'll find out over time. But right now, I'm trying to stay, I know it sounds like I'm being predominantly negative, but I'm trying to stay open-minded about it. Coming up on the rest of the show, we are going to talk a little bit about Atalanta, Arsenal's opponents tomorrow night in Bergamo. I'm going to share with you the latest Arsenal injury news because there was an open training session today. I say open to the media. That was reported on by our good friend Tom Canton, by Charles Watts, etc., etc. And they revealed who took part in training and who didn't. So we'll get into all of that stuff. We'll talk about the subject of rotation because I think that's really, really important now that we're going to be playing 3 games a week. We'll talk a little bit about the starting 11 I'd go with, and I'll share with you guys a prediction before finishing the show off with an update on Patreon because we're going to slightly tweak the Patreon plans this week, and for good reason. I'll explain why in a bit. And I want to talk about the audio that's been released from the PGMOL regarding the Declan Rice sending off because I thought I was over it. I thought I'd moved on. I thought I'd moved past it. I thought I was ready to kind of just look forward. We were missing our key player for the North London derby, but we went there and won. So in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. But then I heard the clips, I heard the audio, and I'm really annoyed about it now. So I'll get into that as well a little bit later on the program. If I could just ask you, though, if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new as well. And if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, please do leave us a review. It really, really does help. Let me just pop out the chat once again so that I can drag it over to the screen in front of me. That certainly helps. Okay, let's get into our opponents, though. Atalanta. Gianpiero Gasperini's Atalanta, also known as La Dea, which, as I said in the intro, translates to the goddess. And if you look at their logo, you'll understand where they're going with that. It's been an inconsistent start to the campaign for them. There's no doubt about that. 2 wins and 2 defeats in Serie A so far. They've managed victories over Lecce and Fiorentina, but suffered defeats in Torino. And they were on the receiving end of a 4-0 thumping from Inter at San Siro. Now, obviously, we go to San Siro to play Inter a little bit later on in this league phase of the Champions League. So I don't know how literally you want to look at these things, but if they thumped Atalanta, that would suggest that they're at a higher level than Atalanta. I don't think it's a reflection on Atalanta, though, and I don't think it tells us that they're a bad side we should be turning up and rolling over with great ease. It tells me that Inter are a very good side, and we have to be wary of that tie. Gasperini's side have a very clear identity. It's been there for a long, long time now. And it seems that whichever players he brings in, whichever players he allows to leave, whatever the turnover looks like, they seem to be able to find a good level of consistency. They've had some better seasons than others in recent years, but generally speaking, for a long time now, Gianpiero Gasperini's Atalanta side have been a very, very good team, playing at a very, very high level. And that's why last season, when they reached the Europa League final, and took on Bayer Leverkusen, who seemed to become everybody's second favourite team over the course of the campaign because obviously they'd gone the entire Bundesliga season unbeaten. They were on course to potentially winning a European trophy as well to add to that and really kind of add that bit of gloss to their season. Everybody was looking at them and going, oh, it'd be lovely, wouldn't it, if they do it? It'd be a great story. Xabi Alonso, etc., etc., a very popular young coach. But me, I was sitting there rooting for Atalanta. And the reason for that is because I've always felt, being quite a big Serie A fan, that Gasperini has never, ever really got the props for the work that he's done at Atalanta outside of Italy. I think within Italy, they all understand that this guy is working miracles with a club that are punching well above their weight. But when you leave the Italian circle and bubble and you start to look at it through different lenses, people will look at Gasperini and Atalanta and they'll say, oh, you say he's done a good job. Well, what has he won? There's a bit of the kind of Tottenhams about it in terms of the way that they were being assessed. And when I say the Tottenhams, obviously they don't win things. The point I'm trying to make is that under Maurizio Pochettino, they were at a much higher level than they'd been for my entire lifetime. But because of the fact that they hadn't crowned that off with silverware, they were always going to be pointed at and they were always going to be spoken in a much lower sort of regard as what was probably deserved given the level they were playing at the time. And so I feel that Atalanta really needed to win something to just show everybody else what a good job Gasperini's been doing. The wider footballing world, the wider European market, if you like. And I think the Europa League was the perfect setting to do that, because you do something domestically, yeah, people will take notice. People will be well aware of who won the Coppa Italia or who won the Coppa del Rey or who won the Coupe de France, but they might not necessarily pay as much attention as if it's something that's done on the continental stage. And that's why I thought for Atalanta to win that, it was huge, it was brilliant, it was amazing, and I'm so chuffed for them. But all of that gets put to one side, of course, because we take them on this Thursday night. They normally play with a back three. That is something that's very, very synonymous to the way they play their system. And one of that back three on Thursday night could be a very familiar face to us Gooners. It could be Mesut Ozil's very own bodyguard, Sead Kolasinac. Yes, Sead Kolasinac plays at the back for Atalanta. He did start the game at the weekend, so there's every chance that he plays of course, on Thursday night, which would be interesting. Other standout players in this Atalanta side, and I'm going to put Kolasinac in the standout player category, include Retegui up top, Ademola Lookman, who Premier League fans will remember from his time in the UK, who netted a Europa League final hat-trick on that famous night that I was just describing. Ederson in midfield is a player that a lot of people like and who many feel is going to move on to bigger and better things sooner rather than later. They also boast the likes of Juan Cuadrado and Nicolo Zaniolo, who were both on the bench at the weekend. They're a side that we can't afford to take lightly, I don't think, particularly on their own patch. So yeah, that's the kind of rundown on them and what I think of them. And I think it's a place where we're going to experience a very hostile atmosphere. It's a place where if we're going to go there and take all 3 points, we're probably going to have to perform at a very, very high level. There's only so many times you can turn up somewhere, not be at your best and get the results. And I think, we do have enough quality that if we, at the very least, defend well, we always have a chance and we can nick a goal on the break or from a set piece, as we've been doing for quite a long time now. But I look at it and I think this is not a tie that we can take lightly. And it's annoying that this one has dropped in between the Tottenham and the Manchester City games. You'd almost have preferred if it was Shakhtar at home, for example. That would have been a tie that I'd have been much more comfortable with having in between. And I guess that brings me on nicely to the injury stuff. And the injury stuff does change my thinking on this. Now, according to those that were in attendance today at that training session, there was still no Martin Odegaard. And if you noticed yesterday when they released the squad photo, they purposely covered, at least it looked like they did, Martin Odegaard's ankle so that you couldn't see, which suggests to me that it's probably still quite swollen. If that photo was taken post the injury, I don't know when the photo was taken, obviously, but that's when they released it, so we can only go by that, I guess. But there was no Martin Odegaard, there was no Alexander Zinchenko still, no Kieran Tierney, no Takahiro Tomiyasu, and no Mikel Merino, despite him being pictured in some of David Raya's birthday celebration photos without the sling, without the cast, which is obviously good. The one that did return, however, was Riccardo Calafiori. And I am sure that Mikel Arteta has his people in terms of looking into oppositions, and they'd have been scouting Atalanta from the minute they knew that they would face them. Gasperini's a coach that I think a lot of coaches within the game look at as inspiration, not because he's the best in the business, but because he has a very clear, defined philosophy, and I think that's very well respected and admired within the game. So Gasperini's way will not be something that Mikel Arteta is totally oblivious to, but I think he might lean on Riccardo Calafiori a little bit just to kind of explain perhaps to the squad culturally what they're going to face when they travel to Bergamo, etc., etc. So based on that injury news, based on those reports that were provided to us earlier today, I think it's fair to assume that of the players that were missing at Spurs, the only one that is in contention to take part on Thursday night is Riccardo Calafiori. So maybe instead of having 5 18 and below year olds on the bench, we're going to have 4. I don't know. We really need to start protecting some of these players better, don't we? You need to start protecting yourselves online with NordVPN. How about that for a transition? Check out nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC for your exclusive discount, where you will also get 4 months for free on the end of your plan if you sign up via our link and code. Check it out, nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC. It gives you extra protection online, which for me is really, really important. To have that peace of mind means the world to me, given that my world and my business basically revolves, I should say, around the internet. It also allows me to access content, streams, videos, TV channels, movies, you name it. I can access it because I don't have to deal with the geo blocks that are in place that prevent you from accessing certain content depending on your location. Because with the click of a button, I can change my location via NordVPN. It's the best damn VPN service out there. I've been using it for probably 3 or 4 years now. I'm not going to say it's changed my life because that sounds a tad dramatic, but it has opened the doors for me to be able to access lots of different things, to be able to keep across football that I wouldn't have been able to previously. And I'm very, very much an advocate of the service. So check out nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC to get your mega discount plus 4 months free on the end of your plan. And if you're not happy with the service or you change your mind, NordVPN have a 30-day money-back guarantee. Take advantage of it. Check it out. nordvpn.com/Chronicles AFC. We thank them for their support of the show. We're going to pop into the chat in just a minute, and then we're going to talk about starting 11s because I'm going to try and figure out what I think the 11 should be. I said to you guys yesterday that I was in two minds about a lot of players, and that over the course of the evening last night and throughout the duration of today, I was going to try and come up with an 11. I think I have. I'm not dead set on it, but I'm going to share it with you guys in a minute. I do want to take some of your questions and thoughts, though, from the live chat. So Derek Syme says, what's the story with the fact that we're playing on a Thursday and why was it changed? So as far as I'm aware, Derek, this is something that's only happening in the first week of the competition. They're doing something similar with the Europa League as well next week, I believe, where that will be spread across the 3 days. I think it's probably some kind of push by the authorities to kind of launch their new formats with a bit of a bang. I think that's the idea behind it. I think that's the thinking behind it. I don't really like it. I've got to be honest. I'm not a fan of it. It's not what I think is the right way to go. I think to have the games over, Tuesdays and Wednesdays is the right way. And I think that we need to do more to protect our teams on the continent. And listen, this is the problem where you get governing bodies like UEFA who obviously oversee European football, and then you get that clash with like the Premier League, who will schedule a game in a way that suits them, right? They'll schedule a game to put it on TV so that they can generate TV revenue from it, and that's what allows them to go and charge the broadcasters mega money to attain those rights every year. And there isn't really a thought for the rest period in between these games. There isn't really a thought for the fact that actually, if you ask these players to play too many games of football and there's too much rotation as a result of managers feeling they have to manage people's workloads, the standard does drop, guys. The standard dips. And I think that's the bit that we always miss here. Now, we're playing on Sunday, so it's not the end of the world that we're playing on Thursday, but I certainly would have preferred that we played tonight, for example, because I think we need a bit of a longer run-up going into the Manchester City game on Sunday, because I think that is a game that has the potential to not be season-defining, certainly not at this stage, but certainly have a say on where the title ends up at the end of the day. So, yeah, that's why I think they've done it. They're trying to push the new format. It's a bit of a, come and check it out. Champions League, new format, launch week. Here we go. Enjoy it. Watch football on 3 consecutive nights, etc., etc. But I'm not a big fan of it, I have to say. I'm not. Let's take a couple more thoughts from here. Steve Stone says, the decision to play on a Thursday aside, I like the idea of the new format. I feel it will bring a lot of excitement to the latter stages of the league round of games. I think it has the potential to do that, Steve. It remains to be seen, though, whether that's going to play out like that. But you're right. That would be the theoretical benefit. It would be that going into the last few games, you could win a couple and you could shoot up that table and potentially knock a favoured team out of their position and force them to have to work in order to try and get through. So I can see what the upside could be. I just don't know if it's going to work out like that. What else have we got? Lots of you putting suggested teams, and we'll come back to the team in a minute. You can share with me your comments as I work my way through my team. Someone said, congratulations on your wedding. Aidan McIntosh, congrats on your wedding. Who's that to? Who got married in the chat? And I don't know about it. What else have we got? BX Gunner says, what's the situation with Saka? He trained, so I'm assuming that he's okay. And Fuad says, Harry, my son Vincent is listening as well. And he's asking, who's your favourite current Arsenal player? Right now, I'm going to say Big Gabriel. It does change for me, like on a weekly basis, but I just feel like he's been so underappreciated over the last few years, and watching him get that winning goal against Spurs and seeing the reaction to that and all the praise that's then come his way in the aftermath is nice, because for a long time I've been beating the drum and arguing that he's just as important as anybody else in this team, including William Saliba, his central defensive partner, because I think they really, really do bring the best out in each other. So as of today, I'm going to say Gabriel. Generally, I'll probably say, though, it's Martin Odegaard. Afsar says, with this new Champions League table, will that impact team selections for the majority of teams? Because I think there will be more rotations to rest players. Well, I guess going back to Steve's point about the fact that the latter stages could be quite exciting, if that's the case and things can be sort of very up in the air, then they can also be quite settled as well. Because, if someone like Bayern Munich win their first 5 games, then the chances of them being knocked out of the top 8 are very, very remote. So I think that you could end up with the opposite situation, and that's why I'm kind of waiting to see how it goes. In theory, it could be great, but in theory, it could also be quite disappointing as well. And I do think that because there's more games, it means there's more margin for error. Because so many teams progress through this league phase, if you did finish in the second 8, for example, it wouldn't be the end of the world, would it really? It's not ideal and you'd rather not have the games, but I do think there'll be stages where people look to prioritise other things, because the additional games and the greater length of this phase means that there is then more margin for error. So, yeah, that's where I'm kind of at on that. Let's talk then about the starting 11 for Arsenal, because this is going to spark a lot of debate. There's a lot of players that are fighting their way back from injuries. There's players that really did, and I liked how they put it on the Arsenal Vision podcast the other day, emptied the tank at the weekend against Tottenham. So how do we manage that? How do we prepare for this game and ensure that we're in the best possible shape for, of course, the Manchester City game at the weekend? Well, we'll start at the back, and there's no way that I'm changing the goalkeeper. So I'm going David Raya in goal. I'm going to go with Ben White at right back. I didn't think he had a great game at Spurs, for what it's worth, but we all know what an important player he is. And I've got to be honest, guys, I'm against messing around with the defence here. So my back 4 is going to be as you were. And I know that some people will say, I'm taking a bit of a risk here because we go to Manchester City and we need that back 4 to be available. If it's not, we're in trouble. With Ricardo Calafiori back in the picture, he could potentially cover for someone, on Sunday if that's necessary, and he'd have a little bit more time to recover. But yeah, is Timber's number 19? I'm trying to think. I can't even remember what number is it. What number's Jurien Timber? Let me know in the chat. Is it 19? Should we Google it? Jurien Timber squad number. I should know this. 12. There we go. I'm way off. 19. Where did I get that from? That's Trossard's number. Right, so my back four would be White, Saliba, Gabriel and Timber. I'm not messing around with that. Where I will mess around a little bit is in the midfield. I have decided, based on my extensive thinking over the last 2 days, that I would leave Thomas Partey out. And I'll come back to explain the reasons why in a minute. I'm going to bring Declan Rice into the midfield, of course, as you do. He's back available. There's no reason why he shouldn't be able to play tomorrow night and on Sunday, given he's had the opportunity to put his feet up at the weekend. And my other midfield player is going to be Kai Havertz, and I'll explain how, for me, this all works in a little bit. The rest of the team that I settled on involves Gabriel Jesus coming into the side, Bukayo Saka starting on the right because, again, I'll explain the reasons in detail in a minute, but in a nutshell, I just think he's too important. And on the other side, I'm going with, and I think his number's 31, correct me if I'm wrong again, but I'm going with Raheem Sterling. So, in my head, it will look a little bit different, and it will look a little bit more like the formation that we saw against Tottenham at the weekend, which means that the wingers will be wingers and tuck into midfield positions at times. Rice will drop that little bit deeper to sit alongside Jorginho, because I think Jorginho needs that partner if he's to have a successful game in midfield. And then I'd be getting Kai Havertz up close to Gabriel Jesus. So that's how my team would look to face Atalanta on Thursday night. So let me just run you through that 11 once again, and I'll explain a couple of the reasons behind what I've gone with. So it's Raya in goal. It's White, Saliba, Gabriel and Timber. Jorginho and Rice would be my midfield pair. Saka on the right, Sterling on the left. Havertz in behind Jesus. And that's what I'm going with. So let me run through the reasoning on some of those. So in my notes, I've put Partey. And I've just written, worried about his fitness. I'm always worried about Thomas Partey's fitness. And I think he's somebody that we have to manage very, very, very carefully, because particularly in the absence of Mikel Merino right now, we can't afford to lose him. We really, really can't. We've got no Merino and we've got no Odegaard for the foreseeable. I don't know how long Martin Odegaard's going to be out for. I'm hoping he returns sooner rather than later. But it's imperative that we protect the midfielders that we have. And Thomas Partey, given his track record of picking up injuries, needs to be, in my opinion, wrapped up in cotton wool. If there's going to be no Odegaard and no Merino, and I'm sure there isn't going to be at Manchester City at the weekend, barring a shock or a surprise, then Partey has to play in that game. Therefore, I'm not playing him in this game. Now, some would say that Jorginho can't play, having played on Sunday, on a Thursday, and then be expected to be involved again the following weekend. And maybe that's true. But I'm looking at it through the lens of their overall load. And Thomas Partey's load has been much heavier so far this season. He's also played 180 odd minutes for Ghana as well on the international break. So his load has been a lot heavier than that of Jorginho's, who only made his first Premier League appearance this season at Spurs at the weekend. So for me, Jorginho is the one that has the capacity to play. So that's why I've taken that decision in the midfield. I mentioned it just briefly there. Bukayo Saka, if he's fit, he starts because he's just too damn important to this team. And I think when we're talking about playing in this way, with this system, with this style, and Atalanta do like to play with wing backs, so they're probably going to try and challenge us in those wide areas and push people up the pitch, we're going to need players that can A, get up and down the pitch, but B, understand the defensive side of the game as well. And there was a temptation on my part for that exact reason to pick Martinelli on the left instead of Raheem Sterling, because I think Martinelli's defensive work is far more effective, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But I'm going to go with Sterling because I think Martinelli is going to be really, really crucial up at the Etihad at the weekend. So that's what I've gone with. Havertz, in an ideal world, guys, I'd love to rest him. But I think it's more important that Partey rests than Kai Havertz does. Jesus is not 100% fit. Obviously, he's just come back from an injury layoff. So how long has he got in the tank? Don't know. Might bring Leandro Trossard on at some point in this game, or Gabriel Martinelli, whatever. But I like the Havertz and Jesus combination. I always have. And I think with those two, if we are pinned back at points, we can go over the top because they're both very good, Jesus and Havertz, at holding the ball up and bringing others into the game. So I think those two playing quite close to each other as almost two strikers, but also with both having that instinct and ability to drop deep, I think that works quite well. So that's what I've decided to go with. Some might say that it's harsh that I've left Leandro Trossard out. There was a lot of debate and discussion around his performance against Spurs. Some thought he was great. Some thought, he wasn't quite at it. I think him being left out here in my kind of team is not a reflection of his performance at the weekend, which I actually thought generally was quite good. It's more of just the effect of a natural rotation that I believe needs to happen. You don't mess around with your defence. You don't mess around with the core of your team so much. I know that I've taken Partey out, but that's for good reason. And you go this way. This is how I would approach it. And even, with Calafiori back, that bench is still going to be, guys, incredibly thin. Incredibly thin. And we've got to understand that. We've got to understand that we don't actually have a great deal to play with right now. We just don't. I think, we've had a lot of conversations about the idea of rotation. And one of the things I've said quite a bit actually going into this season was we need to learn to rotate better. And if I was to be critical of Mikel Arteta about anything, it would kind of be along those lines. It would be that maybe at times when he should have rotated, he didn't. Maybe that was down to, and probably it was largely down to maybe not always trusting in the squad that he had available to him. But as that squad grows and as he brings in more of his own players, and we moved past the whole banter era where we had players that clearly Mikel Arteta wasn't that big on, the less of an excuse there is for not rotating effectively. And I think we can all understand, given what we were talking about at the start of the pod about, the workload and the amount that's being put on these players. We all understand and recognize that if you're going to be successful on multiple fronts, that's got to happen. It simply has to happen. So somebody asked me the question, and I wrote the question down because it was a question that was asked to me in the office earlier today. And the question was, are we going to learn tomorrow night whether Arteta is ready to start rotating more? And initially, I answered the question with a yeah. And then I thought about it. And I looked at who's available. And shortly after that, I read the update with regards to who trained and who didn't. And I looked at it and I thought, no, actually, no, we're not going to learn anything really. Because Mikel Arteta's hands right now are tied behind his back, given the players that we've got missing. Now, there's a whole wider debate around whether or not the squad is big enough generally and how comes that with a few injuries, we look so thin on the ground. And I accept that that is a very valid, but it's a totally separate debate. That's the truth of it. So I just think given the lengthy injury list, I don't know that he really can rotate all that much on this occasion. And so I'm not sure if we're actually going to learn much about Arteta's mindset and appetite to rotate and whether or not that's changed this season with a view to being more competitive on multiple fronts. In terms of my prediction for this game, I think that it's going to be tough. I think it's going to be tricky. I think it's going to be difficult. And I think that the combination of having the derby last weekend with limited resources, what's coming up this weekend, and the difficulty of going to a place like Atalanta, we might just fall slightly short. And by that, I mean, I think it will be a draw. I wouldn't rule out a 0-0. That would be fun, wouldn't it? I wouldn't rule out a 0-0. I genuinely think that that's a real possibility. I'd like to think that we've got enough to go there and win. But I I do wonder if we will look at the fixture and think, given what we've got on the horizon on Sunday and how much last Sunday took out of us physically, we'd be quite content with a draw. Now, Mikel Arteta would never say that, and he'd never publicly put that out. And, you know, I'm starting to question whether I even know what our manager's like, because he always talks about continuity and that winning is a habit and that it needs to be something that's ongoing. And so how could he possibly not want to win this game? But I'm not saying that we go out there consciously taking the decision to take our foot off the gas a little bit, but I think subconsciously, knowing what you've got coming up at the weekend, knowing what you just went through last week, and knowing that there's still 7 more Champions League phase games to come, most of which are much easier on paper than this particular one, do you just go there and be pragmatic? And if you can nick the game, great. If you can't, though, is it really the end of the world? It's probably not, if we're being honest. So my prediction, which is going to be very unpopular with you guys, and I'd love to hear what you guys are saying in the live chat, is a 0-0 draw. 0-0 draw is what I'm going with. Okay, let's have a look at the live chat once again. The Manhattan says, I would start Nwaneri. That's an interesting one, because he obviously trusted him enough to bring him on in the late stages of the North London derby the other day. And I think what Arsenal did, and we discussed it on the pod, didn't we, was make a conscious effort to protect him a little bit in that environment, in that setting. And I wouldn't be surprised if he started. And in an ideal world, I will play Havertz up front and I would use Nwaneri as the midfielder. And maybe with Rice back in there, Mikel Arteta will feel he can do that. But it's a big ask of a young lad to throw him in a Champions League away game in Bergamo. Throw him in at home to Shakhtar, and I think that's a different story. Maybe Arteta will, because Arteta knows him inside out and clearly values him and rates him enough to have him as a part of the squad right now and to be integrating him bit by bit. So maybe Arteta looks at this very differently to me, but I think that is a big, big gamble and a big, big ask. That's just my opinion. Matthew Warner says he would take Timber and Saka out and replace them with Calafiori and Sterling. He'd also quite like to see Havertz rested as well. Abdi Latif says Calafiori and Raheem should start this game, and if possible, Nwaneri. He says, what's the point in playing Saka? Saka will want to play as well, guys. That's the other thing. Bukayo Saka will want to play. This is the opening game of our UEFA Champions League campaign. So yeah, we'll see. Lots of you disagree with my prediction, which is good because I don't want it to be a 0-0 draw. So hopefully you're right, I'm wrong, etc., etc. But we'll revisit that, of course, after the game. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you haven't done so already, please do leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel as well. In terms of the likes, I can only see 59 likes on the board. Now, there's no reason why we shouldn't have at least over 100, given how many of you are with me live right now. It's not acceptable. Like the damn stream. It doesn't cost a thing. Subscribe to the channel as well if your brand's spanking new. And remember, you can check us out on patreon.com as well. It's patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna. The link is in the description below. Thank you to those of you that signed up yesterday. We had a few sign-ups come through on my email. I have messaged you all on Patreon to say thank you, as I always do when someone joins as a member. So thank you so much for that. There is going to be a slight change of plan with the Patreon pod that's coming up post the Atalanta game, and I'll explain why, so bear with me. Normally, the reason I do the match day reaction piece on Patreon and then do the pod either much later that day or that night or the next day is because I'm normally on the ground covering the game, which makes it very, very difficult for me to get home quickly and do the pod quickly. So one of the things that we were offering on Patreon was that I'm not going to call it instant reaction, because it's not like I can get it out 15 minutes after the full-time whistle when I'm covering a game for radio. Often I have to go and do interviews. I'm hanging around. I'm waiting around. So what I do is I do what I call the match day reaction pod, which gives you guys my kind of... I do record it a lot of the time as soon as the full-time whistle goes, but it maybe takes me a bit of time to get it out. So it's kind of like my instant reaction, but it's my raw reaction, I guess, before I've actually had time to sit down, watch anything back, read things, process it all. It's kind of my raw reaction based on what I've just seen. But the Atalanta game is not a game that I'm going to be attending. I am not going to be in Bergamo. I'm going to be here, right here, in the man cave, with my feet up, over there on the sofa, watching the game tomorrow night. So what I figured was, rather than waste the opportunity that I have to do a main pod shortly after the conclusion of an Arsenal game, because it's something I don't get to do very often these days, I'm going to take that opportunity. We're going to go live about half an hour after the full-time whistle of that game. And when we get to the player rating section, which I am planning to include tomorrow, we will then switch over to Patreon. So we'll do the full pod, and then we'll give you guys a bonus section that will drop on Patreon 20 minutes after we finish the main pod. So that's my plan. So I just wanted to give you guys a heads up that the Patreon versus main pod setup around this game is just going to look a little bit different for the reasons that I've explained. But I'm not finished yet. I know this is the Atalanta preview pod, but I do want to have a rant about something. And I want to have a rant and a moan about the PGMOL. Yes, it's not the first time you've heard me moan about them, and I'm sure it's not going to be the last. But yesterday, I sat down and watched the footage that the PGMOL released, along with the audio from the Declan Rice sending off. And it just beeped me off, if I'm being honest with you. Now, lots of people were making the case after that fixture that it's the letter of the law. And the referee, poor old Chris Kavanagh, let's all get the violins out for him, had no choice whatsoever but to send Declan Rice off. And I completely disagree with that. And then I listened to the audio, and there was a clear, I don't know if it's reluctance because he bloody did it anyway, but it was clear that Chris Kavanagh didn't really want to send him off. He didn't really want to send Declan Rice off watching that back. He kept saying, I've got no choice. This is what he said to Captain Martin Odegaard, and I quote, he said, I've got no choice. He's put me in an awful position. I don't like it, but he's kicked the ball. And Martin Odegaard is trying to make the case. You can just about hear what he's saying, that actually Veltman has kicked through him on purpose. Now, what they've done Declan Rice for here is, and I quote, delaying the restart. And they say that they've been very big on this season, and that they really have been hammering home that message to players and football clubs, that kind of stuff, it needs to stop. It needs to be cut out. So that's why Chris Kavanagh says, I've got no choice. He's put me in an awful position. I don't like it, but he's kicked the ball. But in my opinion, they're just trying to create this illusion that they have no choice. Because he does have a choice. And at no point had he decided to go over to Declan Rice and say, Dec, final warning. Would anybody have had the knives out for Chris Kavanagh? The idea that he would have been ridiculed, criticised, shaken down by the media for deciding to apply a bit of common sense and actually going over to Declan Rice and saying, that's your last one. It's mental. Because nobody thinks like that. Nobody inside the stadium at that point thought Declan Rice was in trouble there. When the referee came marching over and put his hand in his pocket, we all thought that he was going to show Veltman a card for kicking through Declan Rice. So it goes to show that if you don't feel it immediately, like if it doesn't kick in as an instinct, then it's probably wrong. And I just think that Chris Kavanagh could have very easily done what I've described. Gone over to the player, had a word, gone over to the captain and said, go and have a word with your player because this can't happen again. He's on his final warning. He's walking a disciplinary tightrope. And I don't even think the Brighton players would have complained about it. Even Joel Veltman said that he was surprised that Declan Rice was sent off. So this idea that the referees have no choice and that they'd be pulled apart and destroyed by everybody associated with the game if they applied common sense is weird to me. And I don't understand why they're trying to create an environment whereby they don't have that authority to actually apply a bit of common sense at times. And there are things that you can't apply this to. Like a foul is a foul, right? And a foul inside the box is a penalty. And so you can't give one and not give the other. There are examples where you have to carry through the letter of the law to maintain consistency because that's the right thing to do. But in this particular instance, when you're talking about someone flicking the ball away, but earlier in the game you didn't even talk to João Pedro, who booted it halfway up the pitch, that's where you're choosing to be consistent and pedantic on one thing, but you're not following it through on the other side. So to me, this was a complete nonsense. And I'll tell you what the line was in this entire audio conversation that really wound me up. It was when one of the assistant referees, after Chris Kavanagh said, "I've got no choice, I've got to show him a second yellow," he said, and I quote, "Look after yourself." What? Look after yourself? Why do you need to look after yourself? Is that the mentality of our referees now? And is that why we're getting nonsense decisions week after week? Because our referees are all banding together. They've become a band of brothers at Stockley Park. And they are of the mindset, we need to protect ourselves. Because a brave referee there says, don't worry about me. If I get a little bit of criticism, so be it. I think the right thing here is to go and have a word. I can guarantee you no one in the football world will have been writing columns the next day or jumping on social media or filming episodes of podcasts calling out the referee and his decision not to send Declan Rice off, because nobody cared. Nobody saw it as a serious enough offence. Apart from a few Jobsworths at Stockley Park, who are clearly of the mindset that first and foremost, rather than doing what's right for the game, and I quote, they need to look after themselves. So yeah, that really annoyed me. That particular comment really, really wound me up. If you've got any questions in the live chat, drop them in for the last couple of minutes of the episode. I'd love to hear from you. Mohammed has put his lineup in the live chat. He's gone Raya, White, Saliba, Gabriel and Calafiori at left back. He's gone Jorginho, Rice and Trossard, and then Sterling, Martinelli and Jesus. He'd like to see Partey, Saka, Timber and Havertz all rested before Manchester City. Teltec, going back to my lineup, says, I like your lineup, but I think Partey needs games. He seems to be that type of player. If he doesn't play, his performance drops. I just think he looks so unfit, mate. And you know, there's only so much time I can look at him at like 60%, 70% and say, it's going to get better, it's going to get better, it's going to get better. Like, he's played, 4 games in the league now. I wanted to see greater signs of improvement around this physical condition. I think there's been some improvement for what it's worth, but I don't know that it's enough for me to feel really, really confident. Moss says there were some more yellows this last weekend for kicking the ball away, time wasting, but yeah, refs need to warn more. And he said, why did Thomas Partey and Rice get yellows for their first fouls too? Yeah, I mean, when it comes to the number of fouls, I'm not always a big believer in that kind of system of saying, well, it's his first one. Because if it's cynical, then it's a yellow card. And someone can make 2 non-cynical fouls, 2 slightly late challenges with all the best intentions without having that cynicism in what they're doing. And that's not worthy of a yellow, in my opinion. Do you see what I mean? So I don't look at it just on the numbers game, but I get what your point is. And I guess for me, it's not necessarily like, if everybody's getting booked for that, then fine. But not everybody's getting booked for that. We saw, as much as we saw yellow cards for delaying restarts at the weekend, we also saw examples of restarts being delayed and no action being taken. So that consistency thing is what it boils down to. Again, you either do it with everybody and you enforce it across every game and every situation, or you don't. And you're right to highlight in the live chat, Moss, that the very best referees, like Colina, for example, would have probably just gone over and had a word. Now, I've said to you guys many times before, I never played professional football, but I played football at a very, very high level. And I'm very proud of that. And I know that what I did is not comparable to what these guys are doing on a weekly basis. But I played in a league where I always remember one specific referee, and for good reasons. And so whenever I sit there and I'm hypercritical of referees and I start to get angry with them and I'm sitting there saying they're ruining the game and they're this and they're that, I have to kind of remind myself. And I think of this guy as an example of, good refereeing. Because what he used to do was have a word. And he'd be there and he'd be close to the action all the time. And he'd talk to everybody with respect. And I felt that the players reciprocated that. I always felt like he got that respect back from us. There was a time where I was playing up front and I was getting lumps kicked out of me. And I kept turning to him and asking for fouls. And some of them he gave and some of them he didn't. And I remember being furious that he didn't give them. I remember going down and wanting a penalty. And he sort of jogged along behind me after I'd sort of got back up off the ground and was making my way back into my position. And he just explained to me, as we were jogging back, why he didn't give it. Now, I didn't agree with the decision at the time, and I was fuming at the time. And of course I was arguing back because I was a mouthy little so-and-so when I was sort of 16, 17 years old. But after the game, because I had that explanation, I felt like I had a bit of closure on that, and I was fine. And I think communication is so key and so important. And rather than speaking to someone on a walkie-talkie in Stockley Park who's telling you, look after yourself, mate, that's what's most important, you should be in dialogue with the players. And I know that football is not always a mature enough sport for that to work on every single occasion. But I think as a referee, that's what you should aspire for, to develop a mutual respect between players and referee and to communicate in the most effective way possible so that in situations like that, people, even if they disagree, have some reasoning to go by, and in some cases, some closure as well. But yeah, that's just my take on it. But anyway, we're going to leave it there, I think, because we've been going on for the best part of an hour now. It was only supposed to be a 20-minute show, but there you go. Always great chatting to you guys. Always a pleasure interacting with those of you in the live chat as well. Remember, check out nordvpn.com/ChroniclesAFC, and don't forget to check us out on patreon.com/The Chronicles of Aguna. Remember, we're going to be bringing you a full live pod about half an hour after the full-time whistle against Atalanta tomorrow night, and then for the last 15 minutes, or for let me get this right, for an additional 15 minutes, we're going to jump over onto the Patreon side, and you'll be able to get what I think is probably going to be my player ratings, and if there's anything specific from the game that I think is worthy of a kind of standalone piece, then I'll do that on the fly as well. So really looking forward to that. Thank you for your continued support. Remember, leave a like on YouTube on the way out if you haven't done so already. We're just short of that 100 likes target. I'd love to get the video overall to 500 likes. That would be amazing. And if you're listening on audio, guys, please do leave us a review. It really does help. I'll see you all post Atalanta, unless something major breaks in between. Up the Arsenal. I think it's going to be a tough game, but it should be an interesting one. Till then, take care. Goodbye.